Jody, is it okay to make money off your art?
It, it's okay to make money off your art, Eric. It's okay. It's okay.
Can you start with just kind of talking about yourself? Where were you born? How did you find writing? Um, how you found your way to real estate? Like that whole story you have. I love it. And I just like you to just go off on it.
Yeah, you bet. So Denver is my hub. I was born at a hospital known there as the Knife and Gun Club. So it was where everybody who got really traumatic injuries went, and I like to think that's played a role in my life. But anyways, I spent the first formative parts of my years in Denver and just got myself in all kinds of trouble. And so I moved to Omaha, where my dad's parents lived when I was 19 and fell in love with the city, which people think that's crazy. Leave mountains to go to the Great Plains. But it's always felt like a beautiful place to have meaningful work, and the speed of life is just so nice in the Midwest. I do have kind of wanderlust, and I've been all over the country, but I really like calling Omaha and the surrounding area home, and I imagine I probably will for the rest of my life. Um, Unless I get a chance to move to Peru, that would be kind of cool as well. Um, so, anyways, I got into real estate because I had failed to publish my book on the timeline that I thought was appropriate. Going back to right around that time, 19, when I moved to Omaha, I knew that I wanted to write, but I didn't know that there was an avenue by which you could get any kind of education or how to do it or like what the process was. And it didn't occur to me that I could just do it. Like I needed someone to tell me how to do it, I think. And that probably is a little bit like me in life, is that I need a push and then I want you to leave me alone and let me figure it out from there. So when I discovered that there was something called a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, I jumped into that, and I started my education doing that at the age of 21. So I was kind of late to the whole college thing. When my whole class was graduating college, I was just starting, but I loved it. And it gave me such a dedication to take it really seriously. Got my Bachelor of Fine Arts, moved on to a master's, wrote the thesis, which I thought was going to be the book I published. I got a really strong recommendation from a visiting professor at the MFA to submit my novel to an agent, which I did. And she passed, which taught me a lot about okay, even with a strong recommendation, there's no guarantee of success. So from there, I decided I needed to write something that was a little more commercial and that I thought I had a better chance of nabbing an agent and getting into a publisher and getting into readers' hands. So I wrote The Nine Lives of Marva DeLonghi, which is a detective novel with kind of a speculative element. I always say it's kind of like the Big Sleep meets Groundhog Day is kind of the novel if you were taking two comp titles. And I was able to get a literary agent with that novel. So everything's going according to plan. And I think it's going to be a matter of months. And I'm going to have a book deal in my hand with a six-figure advance. And I'm going to be scheduling a worldwide reading tour. And after a year of nothing but rejection from all of the editors at the big publishing houses, I started to realize that wasn't in the cards for me with this book. And I thought, okay, if a publisher is not going to publish me, then I am going to at least ensure that I can see an end in sight where I have to work for somebody else. And I'm going to get my own patrons, basically. And that was where the idea of buying the rental houses came from. So my wife and I talked it over. She was super reluctant to do the real estate thing, but being like me, I had researched the heck out of real estate and figured it was going to be something that we could definitely do and make money on. So we got our first rental house. A couple months later, I was able to pick up another rental house. A couple months later, I was able to pick up another rental house, and things are going really great. And I am passionate about it. And everybody that I'm interacting with is affirming that I'm doing a great job at this. And like, I actually started to have visions of owning an empire of rental houses and apartment buildings and all that kind of stuff. And it was cool. It was awesome to have all that money. It really was. I'm not going to lie. It was a lot of fun. But I started to sink into this like depression, and I didn't know what it was exactly. I wasn't sure why I felt so useless when I was doing something great and I was building a legacy for my family. And what I realized was, in giving my heart to real estate, I had sold out on being passionate about writing. I was still going through the motions, man. I was writing every morning. I was waking up to do the writing. I was reading at night before going to bed. I was thinking about it, but I had disconnected from the passion of saying, this is what I'm going to do. And so in the fall/winter of 21, just this last year, I had a heart to heart with Ashley and decided we're going to start unraveling these rental properties. And instead of them making us passive, quote unquote, passive income, we're going to use the actual profit that is built into these to live on. And it should give me about 3 years, of which I'm already 8 months into this journey, but it should give me about 3 years to make it or break it doing writing and podcasting and reading full time.
Now, so there's a lot to unpack there, because there's a lot of people who are in, they're in the writing sector full time, but they're also doing real estate as a side hustle. Would you ever continue to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not too long ago, I really did start to think again about getting back into another segment of real estate investing, which is vacant land. I know it pretty well. I have some pretty solid connections there. And I've been dabbling with it because it is really tough to make money as a writer, as a podcaster. And so I'm tempted. I am tempted, but like it's kind of like not as life-threateningly the same question as somebody who's used like cocaine and been like, well, have you ever thought about drinking? Because you might be able to handle that, And so like part of me is like, if I go back, what's to stop me from just getting right back into that drilled in mindset of like accumulating lots and lots of real estate and like not focusing on the writing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, because what I've found too is the writing, there's working a full-time job and writing on your breaks, writing when you get home, writing before you go to work in the morning. Like that's well and good. It's maintaining your craft to a certain extent, but I found that the work I turn out when I'm doing it that way suffers. During the pandemic, when there was no work, when I was able to lock down and just focus on stuff, that's when the best stuff really turned up. And so that's why I relate to what you're saying, is you really have to focus fully on this if it's going to work out, not just from a creative standpoint too, or a craft standpoint, but from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I think that it's similar to what people will talk to you about in relationships. If you want to have a happy marriage and you're married and that's your thing, you have to choose to give your full self to that person. You can't be kind of 1 foot out the door, and you can't think of that person as fitting into your life. They have to be integrated into your life, and I think that's similar here. Is I can't have writing, be my spouse and then have like real estate the mistress on the side.
That's such a good analogy. You have some interesting quotes here and some quotes that have been said about you. I was listening to, you were on the, was it Matt Balaker podcast?
Yeah.
Trying to read my handwriting. There's some great stuff in that I'd like to continue to unpack, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It's all about continuing a discourse. So we're going to kind of continue a discourse you started with Matt. So you said to Matt that there's no way you're going to make money at this unless you sell out, which is something that I really, really have trouble hitting home to certain people who are going into this, especially MFA people who haven't quite figured out that it's not like you're going to write some Hemingway-esque thing. Most people aren't going to read it anyway, but you have to kind of sell out your writing. And that might even mean the projects that you're most passionate about. That might mean the people you're willing to work with, or even the style of writing that you love to write might not work. Yep. And so when you said that to Matt, I'm just like, that makes like nobody talks about that, especially in an MFA program. And you and I basically have similar degrees. You have a BA in writing. I have a BA and an MFA in writing. You do too, just from different institutions.
Yep.
But and I don't remember anyone in my BA or my MFA saying, you're going to have to sell out to a certain extent if you want to make money at this. It's the brutal truth. Brutal truth.
It is. Yeah, it's awful. I mean, and there's different ways to think about it too, because going back to like Ian Fleming, he writes all the James Bond novels, and I think there's a mystique around him that he was a great writer and that he was really prolific, but he literally wrote a book when he needed to make money. He didn't enjoy the process. He never claimed to like it. I think he had fun when he was in it, but he would go spend 3 months somewhere, hammer out a James Bond novel, send it off to his publisher, and then go back to doing what he enjoyed. So there's that version of selling out, which is, okay, I know how to write this thing that can make money. And I just happen to have almost this like, possession over me where I can just pump this thing out that people love. And then there's the type you're talking about, which is, there's some kind of writing that I'm really passionate about, but I know that it's so niche that it will never have the ability to make me a living. So I am going to develop my craft to write something that can reach a broader audience and let that be a bridge. And sometimes that might even be like copywriting or something like that. And then I think that there's the third kind, which is I can acknowledge that there's something amazing in any genre. And I'm going to challenge myself to write genres that are broadly appealing, but still communicate the same kind of themes that I'm interested in. And I'd like to shamelessly pitch Stephen King as the perfect version of the third road, which is he is, I think, maligned by the literary community, but in reality, he's writing some of the most deeply woven philosophical novels out there that just happen to appeal to people who travel in the airport every day.
Yeah, and in my MFA too, he was often maligned, as you said, and looked down on. And I even coined the term a train station author because those are the kinds of books you'll buy in Penn Station, or South Station, or wherever you're based. And but at the same time, I knew for a fact that if the school could ever afford to get him there for a talk, everyone would show up because everyone wants to know how to do it.
Yep.
And that brings us to what you're doing with your podcast. Is your main subject is the business side of publishing, and it's a much needed void in this whole podcasting, YouTube, multimedia world. Is how do you actually get the business side done? Because it's certainly not something that they talk about in art school, whether it's a writing school or a mixed media art school or a film school. No one talks about money.
Yeah. I still, it is kind of a mystery to me. So I just finished recording an episode for my podcast with the Nebraska State poet. And I knew this was going to be an interesting one because poets really have a hard job marketing in the first place. Like even if they're really good marketers, marketing poetry is going to be fairly tough because anyways, I'll dive into it. Just trust me, it's impossible. But, I also knew that he was great at things like organizing events to do slam poetry and getting people together and getting people passionate about it. And I kept talking to him over and over and over again and saying, what you're doing is marketing. And he couldn't see it. And I thought that was the funniest thing is like, you actually already have all the raw tools to market, but you don't know you're doing it. And then the minute you turn the switch from, hey, I'm really passionate about poetry, let's get together and do a slam and have a lot of fun and rap with each other and just be like poets sharing enjoyment, to, hey, will you buy my book? It feels dirty to you. You're like, oh, I just asked somebody to buy my book. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it is. I agree with you. It's much needed. It's been a long journey to try to figure out what I really have to say about it. And it's been one of the coolest marriages. Funny that I that word comes to mind, because it is a marriage of what I learned real estate and putting that right back into marketing your books. Is a lot of the stuff that works with real estate happens to also work with marketing your book.
Yeah, and I can see how that correlation would work. You kind of learned to become an entrepreneur through real estate, and now you're applying what you learned to your artwork.
Yeah.
I love this quote that you told Matt. Maybe he's gifted and it doesn't even matter. You're talking about a friend of yours. And I feel like in this age, there are so many gifted people where it doesn't really matter if they're gifted or not. And for some reason, that quote stood out to me and I wrote it down.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I hate that is true, but there are so many authors working right now who are making a living on their writing, and they're not particularly gifted. I do buy into the idea that some of the craft is subjective. A story that appeals to me is not necessarily going to appeal to you. I just finished a book by David Koepp called Cold Storage, and I thought it was brilliant. I loved it. I binged it in a single day. Like, I put off a whole bunch of stuff I was supposed to do yesterday, and I'm just reading this book. So after I was finished, the ending didn't quite land right for me, and I wanted to check out some reviews. And I was shocked. Everybody said that the character development was really weak, but I was like, that's what made me love the book, was the characters. So there is something subjective. Overall, I think it's still at a 4.2 star rating or something really good. So it's just that people who didn't like it were identifying the same reason for not liking it. But there is also the reality that you tend to get repetition. When somebody doesn't like something, they dislike it for the same reasons. And that is also the objective part of art, is that sometimes you're not talented. Sometimes you're terrible at developing characters or telling a story, but you are amazing at getting people to like you.
Yeah. Well, I saw you were writing on Goodreads. You were engaged with the Goodreads page for that book.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
You were really excited about it.
I was excited about it. I will tell you, so I was in my bachelor's degree. Have you heard of James McBride before?
James McBride?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wrote The Color of Water, and then, oh, you know what? The Good Lord Bird just came out on maybe HBO. Ethan Hawke played the main character. But anyways, so James McBride has written some really popular books, and I think he's a great writer. So it's not necessarily a good example. But when he came to do a reading at my school during my bachelor's, he didn't read. He just talked to the audience, and he's just riffing. And everybody's like, this guy's super strange. He's not what I was expecting. He doesn't seem intellectual. He doesn't seem unapproachable or artistic in any way. He's like, tells this anecdote. He's like, you know what, y'all, I get here and somebody drives me to my hotel, and I'm dying for a cigarette. Like, I need a cigarette like you wouldn't believe. And I go outside and there's signs all over the place. Like, you can't smoke here. You can't smoke here. And like, I don't know where to go. So I end up walking out in the middle of a field by the hotel, and I'm kneeling down because I'm afraid I'm going to get arrested, and I'm smoking my cigarette. And like, that's the kind of stuff he talked about at his reading, quote unquote. And I thought, this is great. This is really good stuff. You're marrying a personality with a skill. And I think that he's been super successful for that.
Yeah, it sounds like he took a page from Bukowski, because that sounds a lot like what I hear about Bukowski going to like universities. Won't you read us? I think he's got one poem where he writes in detail, like one experience where the professor is like, won't you read us one of your poems? And he just gets up, leaves, and goes pukes in the quad. Like,
yeah.
Yesterday I was listening to the latest episode of your podcast where you were reading an extract from a book that you're coming out with called The 7-Figure Marketing Mindset for Novelists.
Yes.
And you were talking about the low-fat diet craze of the 60s and how that exacerbated diabetes. But then you also have this other story you wrote. Let's see, what was the title of it? We Eternal Beings. And you kind of start that off. You're talking about somebody who developed a condition because of her diabetes. And I won't explain it because it can be really nauseating to hear about that stuff. But do you have a stake in this disease or in this version of being health conscious?
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, my father is now a type 2 diabetic. So it's genetically, we're a little bit predisposed toward it. And I think in general, it probably has a lot to do with the fact that in all things, I've got the addict's gene. It's like turned on in all different ways. So I was a cigarette smoker from the age of 12 up until 25, and using nicotine in some fashion until 31, I think, or so. So I've been completely nicotine free for the better part of a decade. Um, Alcohol is something that I'm always struggling with. I always think like, oh, I can control this and I'll be doing reasonably well for me. And then all of a sudden, it's next Friday. I've never been that bad actually, but it's, I do struggle with it, and I'm prone to blackouts. And um, my wife and I have even taken precautions so that I'm not in drinking in situations where I could get in a car. I mean, it's that way for me, and we know that about me. And I bring up all of this because my relationship with food is very much like that. And when I am not thinking about my diet and about my health, it's really easy for me to pack on weight. So from February of 2020 to February of 2021, I put on 70 pounds. That is a lot of weight. 365 days, 70 pounds. I was like just constantly throwing on weight. And I started having all of the pre-diabetic signs. And so we, over the course of our marriage, have always been pretty good at then losing weight. We've been good at dieting, but the problem is that you don't change your mindset. And mindset is so important to me in all things. And so I started doing some really deep dive research. What are the kind of things? Is there any way, for one, to change my body so that my body doesn't crave the same stuff? And then is there any kind of lifestyle where I can incorporate some of the things that I enjoy back into my diet? Because it felt like calorie counting as a vehicle for health only got me so far every time. There becomes a part, and I'm sure that anybody listening right now, and maybe even you can relate, there comes a point where you've lost a certain amount of weight through calorie counting alone, and you're hungry all the time. It's relentless. And we would get to that point where you had lost a lot of weight. People would praise you on how good you looked, but you're literally spending 18 hours awake thinking about food all the time, wishing the things that you could eat. And it was like this hamster wheel that was impossible to get off. So I actually relate all of this story to why I'm doing what I'm doing right now and why I'm passionate about health. Was there is a way that you can change your physiology. You can change your brain chemistry. You can change your relationship to food. And it's through the really uncomfortable process of fasting. So I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving anybody advice, but there's a lot of doctors and a lot of advice to be found out there if you're interested in learning more. So my wife and I do water fasting, and it has drastically changed my relationship with food. So it's an ongoing fight. It's an ongoing war. Unfortunately, the physiology can change both ways. So you can get to a really healthy place where you're not always thinking about food, where you're not always thinking about alcohol or tobacco or anything. I was able to quit smoking kind of through this whole matrix, this process of there are ways to change who you are. And again, I would say that this is true about marketing your writing. There is a way that you can get comfortable asking people to buy your book and not be a sleazeball about it.
Yeah. 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 I have that same problem, which is why it stood out to me. Food is my weakness.
Yeah.
And, I found that there's this metabolism cleanse that this woman has. Her name is Haley Pomeroy, and I've done it twice this year. And
Nice.
every time I come out of it, it's only like 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a 5-day and there's a 10-day. I only do the 5-day.
Yeah.
And at the end, I always feel like I'm 17 again.
Nice.
And that's kind of like
Yeah.
my measurement for whether or not I'm healthy, of course, is do I feel
Yeah.
like I'm 17 again? I
Yeah.
just wish that it's something I could have all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are these... It's rooted on these like green shakes that are just they taste okay. You get used to them.
Yep.
But it has everything you need, so you never need to make a meal.
Yeah. That is such a huge part of this, is if you can take choice out of the matter, a lot of times you're set up for success just by removing choice. So
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah. Sometimes if we have too many choices, it hinders our productivity in every facet of life.
Yes.
Previously, you were talking about, not with me, I think this was on Matt's podcast, you were talking about, your parents are missionaries? Was that what you said? Okay, because that's also something we have in common.
Yeah.
Is my mother was dispatched to Guatemala to convert some people, and that never sat well with me.
I like the language there, man. Dispatched to Guatemala to convert some people. That's brilliant.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not a fan of the whole missionary thing. Really irks me for more reasons that I'm going to go into here. But especially if you watch the people who call themselves missionaries traveling around the world and in really nice airplanes and just like taking road trips. That's pretty much their lifestyles. Road trips to visit church, to raise money, to go to China and keep the whole stupid machine running. And you're like, I've watched your presentations. I've been kind enough to watch those presentations that ask me for money, and the things that you're doing. Google's doing that stuff for their employees at their campuses. That's called business training. You're training people to be business people. And I like, even if I were going to entertain a faith of some kind, it certainly wouldn't be the faith of business. So,
Well, the I've always said that the offering plate is the best form of income if you can command it.
no kidding. Yeah,
Is this something that you integrate into some of your writing? These
it
feelings?
is. Yeah, I do. You mentioned we eternal beings. That story does touch on the Christian faith tradition, which is something I'm just never going to be free of, even though I have a really strange relationship to it now. And people who were friends of mine when I was actively a part of the church call me a heretic now, which is always fun. Like, even though, like, heresy to what? I don't get me started, but it's a weird thing to be like, you called yourself my friend, and now that I have a slightly different belief than you, or maybe a largely different belief than you, I'm the enemy. So that's strange. But that being said, I mean, the story about we eternal beings is a grief story about death and like what happens to us after we die and our life and what does it mean. And I'm very uncomfortable with that, just spiritually speaking. I feel kind of eternal. I don't, do you, does that relate to you at all? Because you do have a similar background. You were raised in a Christian background. Do you still feel a tug or like any desire for eternity? Or
Not. I mean, if eternity is a version of what I'm living through now, hell no.
yeah, not at all. And not a Christian one either, not like harps and angels or
Yeah.
anything, but just the sense that like whatever consciousness is, it persists after I leave this
Yeah.
body. Does that appeal to you, or
Well,
do you
the
like the
best,
void?
so the most appealing explanation that I've heard about it came last season. I did a podcast with a woman named Miriam Van Scott. She wrote the Encyclopedia of Hell, which is like a really controversial and horrifying book.
Yeah.
And she was talking about how heaven, in her eyes, is you just have all the time to get to all the books you want to read, to watch all the films you want to watch, and
Yeah.
to just have as much conversations about them with the right people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that sounds great, because that's
Yeah.
all I want to do anyway.
Right.
But we don't know if that's like, there's
Mhm.
no way you can know that that's what it is. And if it's not what it is, then I don't want anything other than that. So,
Right. You know what's really compelling to me is that I was told, and I mean, if you think about the framework of the heaven that you were taught about, you can't have competition because you can't have winners and losers because there's no crying in heaven. You know, all tears are going to be wiped away. That, in and of itself, for almost anybody I can think of, if you sat and thought about it for a minute, you'd be like, there's something wrong there because I actually like competition. I want to win at something, and losing's not the end of the world to me. I mean, I don't love losing, but I'm no less of a person if I lose. And I like just thinking about that. I'm like, I need a place where losing doesn't hurt me as bad as it does here, but that I still have the opportunity to lose if there's such a thing as eternity. Like, that's part of what I want. And I agree with you. Reading books, watching movies, consuming nature, those kind of things. If I had a safe place to do that, where if I could get back in the ocean, man, and not be afraid of jellyfish. I got stung by a jellyfish when I was a kid. And I have always been afraid of the ocean ever since, except it's the place that draws me too. Like, I feel most me sitting on the beach looking at the waves rolling in, but most terrified when I put in the water. So I want an eternity where I get both things. I get to be all me, go in the water, and not be afraid. That would be cool.
well, that brings to mind this idea that people who've had near-death experiences
Mm.
often talk about how they come back with this realization that we're kind of in an educational program, that life is kind of a school, the school of life. We've heard that term
Yeah.
1,000 times, right?
Yeah.
And to me, what is failure but a learning opportunity? It
Hmm.
might be that, let's say, consciousness does go on to something where tears are wiped away. Like, of course, there wouldn't be failure, but there also wouldn't be a learning opportunity. So
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, we're just philosophizing here because I don't really believe in one thing or the other.
Right.
But I definitely think about this stuff all the time. And maybe life is because that other side lacks the ability to learn. In
Yeah.
that there's no failure, there's no competition. How are you
Mm.
going to learn without those?
Right. I I have no clue. I'm open to the idea too. I mean, a phrase that I don't remember where I picked it up. I think I actually literally saw it on a T-shirt. But don't believe everything you think. I do subscribe to that idea. Like I have some kind of wacky thoughts, some really justifying thoughts. If I want to eat that thing I want to eat, man, like I can definitely have thoughts that tell me why that's the best idea. Uh, so I do think like don't believe everything you think, but I don't know.
That's a great quote. Don't believe everything you think.
Yeah, I had this terrible habit of letting people who are better than me at certain things like do things. So I've got this friend John who is more technical, and a lot of times if I'm really stumped, I'll just be like, "Hey, can you take care of this for me?" And he'll do it, and he should probably establish some boundaries at some point.
Yeah, I used to make films with this guy Brandon back in Maine, who I always felt like not only was just better from a technical standpoint, he was always knowledgeable about what the latest things were. And I always thought he could make so much more money if he came to a place like New York and
Yeah,
left Maine, but he never did. And I wish I could be one of those people, but
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's a trade-off. Is I'm less tech savvy, but I was willing to leave.
Yes, exactly. Now, when you say leave, though, so a lot of people feel like Maine is the promised land. I feel like it's a really popular place in your
So,
mind.
yeah. Well, you're talking about moving from the mountains to the city. Why would you do
Yeah,
that? Why would I move from an island off the coast of Maine to New York City, where
yeah,
smelly city, urine town?
yeah,
And,
exactly.
and the fact of the matter is, it just wasn't for me. But it was for everyone else. Everyone else stayed. My
Yeah,
entire class stayed.
yeah,
But I never felt like I belonged there.
yeah.
My ideas for what I wanted to do weren't rooted in fishing or construction or, I
Mm,
wasn't going to wear a tool belt.
right.
And so I came to New York because New York has everything I want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do really. New York City is amazing. My wife and I honeymooned there, and other than it's not like the best place to honeymoon for certain reasons, like I was totally all switches flipped on. It's amazing to just walk around and the endless humanity, and I'm pretty fascinated by tall buildings and architecture in general. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't stop obsessing over it for more than a decade. I think around the time the pandemic and the lockdown, I had started feeling the first inclinations. Well, I'm tired of this, you know.
Yeah.
But even it's not even that strong though. With some people, like they left within a year or so. Like everybody I
Hmm.
knew when I first moved here are no longer here.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
people just always end up leaving, and I don't see myself doing that. Like
Hmm.
we now got a kid on the way, and we face that question: where is this child being raised? Is it going to be raised in New York, or is it going to be
Hmm.
raised somewhere else, but with access to New York? And honestly, like, I want a city kid.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want,
I know people who have raised their kids in New York City. And I remember my wife saying at one point, she's like, I love visiting here, but I could never live here. It's so dangerous for kids. And like they couldn't have a good, growing up and stuff. And I do think of it differently, but I understand that the mentality of like it would be scary for a kid to be on the subway.
but it's not. So
I know.
so the thing is like Manhattan, especially. It's almost so family friendly that it can be annoying if you're in your 20s and you're young.
Uh,
Like, oh, what the hell are these families doing here?
yeah.
And my girlfriend grew up on the Upper West Side, and she would take the subway to the Bronx for school every day.
Mm.
It's just normal. You just eventually, if you're born here and you're raised in this, it becomes a normality.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first moved here, I worked in Times Square at the Virgin Megastore, and I remember walking to work one day through Times Square because that's where the store was, and some tourist was like, "Oh my gosh, there's a school bus in Times Square," and I just looked. I'm like, "Yeah, people live here. It's a normal place, except that it's not normal."
Yeah. It's not, yeah, exactly. It is. It's a normal place and it's not normal. There's something amazingly different about New York City. It is a really cool place.
There was an interesting and highly disturbing video that somebody posted yesterday, and I see this all the time, but I just got so used to it that seeing this video kind of made me realize how wrong it is. They were shooting it from the balcony of their apartment building, and you could see this line of buses outside a public school. And then this person pans over 2 blocks away to a private school, and it's 3 rows of SUVs, black SUVs parked, taking up multiple lanes of traffic. And all the kids at the private school were being picked up by limousine companies. Everyone at public school
Oh my gosh.
being picked up by yellow buses. And I'm like, that is the perfect illustration of what's wrong with this country. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I love about this city is it is showing you all the great stuff and all the bad stuff in pure
Yeah.
contrast so you can see it clearly.
Yeah. Makes me wonder a little bit about, and this is your podcast, so take back over.
Yeah,
but
we can do whatever we want.
I'm a little bit curious about the tension I have around wanting to make money with my novels. Like, it is important for me to make a living, and I have no issue with making a large living, having a lucrative profession out of all of this. What are your feelings on that? Just generally speaking, I mean, does it seem to you that there's a point where you've been so successful that you just now have to give that money away, or how does that affect your mindset toward the whole process in general, I guess?
Well, do I have a problem? So are you asking if I have a problem making money or a lot of money?
Maybe, yeah, I guess so. And the reason I'm asking is because I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you that, like, the limo company that picks up the kids and takes them back to their gated community of ultra richness,
Right.
is a
Okay.
problem.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
But generally speaking, there's a certain point where you become that person who you have that money, and then what
Right.
do you do?
Yes. So I've always been against private schools for the reason that it takes resources away from everyone else. If everyone was forced to go to public schools, the rich would invest in public schools. We know this because of Europe.
Yeah.
And that's just my understanding of the world. It's very accurate, and it annoys me about America. At the same time, with a kid on the way, one of the reasons I want to be in New York City is because I want to pitch him or her, whatever ends up being, to one of those really great private schools to see if we can get a scholarship there. Like,
Yeah.
it's not lost upon me that this is the way the world functions. And
Yeah.
if I have to go through what I have to go through to make sure the kid gets the best of the best, even if it means continuing a system that doesn't work for most people, like, I'm not going to single-handedly change that system.
Right.
I will advocate for a better system, but me...
And participate in the other system, which is a
Right.
weird place to be.
Right. But the thing is my priority is to set the kid up for success, right?
Right.
Well, me advocating, making this person like a political prop. Oh, you have to go through misery because I don't believe in this. Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's why I ended up with a horrible childhood. That's why I was really unprepared when I came into the world.
Yeah.
That's why I was so ignorant when I moved to New York. I didn't know anything. And it's just like, I don't want that for my kid. Like, I want them to be connected. I want them to know how what real money looks like. I'm not talking about working class money. I
Right.
grew up in a trailer park, bro.
Yeah.
I want this person to understand that $500,000 is not a lot of money. I want that to be their normal mindset.
Yes. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. And I advocate for everybody to have that mindset. Like, I do remember in real estate that point where I used to think that $5,000 was a big decision. I was like, if I'm going to put $5,000 on the table, that's a really big decision. And then that moment when $5,000 became like oh, I'm going to write that off in real estate fees, or I'm going to give my realtor a $2,500 bump just for being so great. Didn't bother me all of a sudden because I was talking in a totally different scale of economies. I really like that. And I like that there are ways that it's accessible to all of us, but it is a mindset thing and it's not for everybody. So,
but do you see though what I did there? See, I know your brand, and I brought it back to mindset.
You did, I know.
Because you got to sell your book when it comes out.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm going to give it away for free for a period of time, because stupid email lists,
Yeah. Well, there's a few things I'd like to hit on before we wind this down.
Yeah.
Are you still spending 6 hours a day on Twitter?
No.
Did you wind that down?
I've wound that down quite a bit, and it is nice. So I will tell you, in terms of if anybody's interested in listening to my podcast, those are the 2 episodes I would highly recommend, because I think they embody the everyman's way to build a brand quickly. I did start out spending 6 hours. What
are the episode numbers?
That's a good question. I took the episode numbers off. I'll email you after this is over, though. Yeah. And then if you look them up, it is 5,000 followers on Twitter in 30 days, and then 10,000 followers in 92 days. So those are the titles of the episodes. And I would recommend listening to those, because they give you an idea of the work that it takes to build a brand, but how quickly it can happen too. To go from 0 to 5,000 is takes most people several years. And there's a method that anybody can follow and reproduce if you want to put the time in. And at the same time, I've been really pleased to find out that it takes about 2 hours a day right now to keep that machine running at a reasonable amount. So I pick up anywhere between, I got 54 new followers yesterday. The day before I got 146. So yeah, exactly.
You're rocking it.
Yeah. And it's nice once you have it set up, it kind of starts to run itself. And I think you find that out about a lot of life is when you're George Clooney, you don't pay for a meal if you go out to dinner, because people are so excited to honor you by coming to their restaurant. Sucks, but that's how life works.
Yeah, well, we all want it.
Yes.
But until we don't have it, we despise it. But we still want it.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the other things you were talking about at one point is you actually said something about selling books on Amazon that really resonated with me, that so many people don't talk about, because there's such a hatred for Amazon, especially if you love traditional bookstores. Mm-hmm. But you were talking with Matt about the positive aspects of Amazon, which is that books tend to grow, whereas in traditional publishing, books die at 3 months. Mm-hmm. Unless they're like the Da Vinci Code, then they die at 6 months. But I've never heard that bluntly stated before on any of these literary podcasts, because there's so many people whining about the death of brick and mortar bookstores, which it's sad, but at the same time, there's so many books that they're not ever going to carry at those stores. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on Amazon and the future potential of independent publishing or even traditional publishing?
Yeah. So I want to try to be really focused on this answer, because I do think that it's an important question, and it really sums up a lot of the themes that we've danced around in our entire conversation. There's something inherently wrong with what Amazon is doing, because it is taking choice away from us, and that to me is scary on a long enough timeline. Anytime you take choice away, there's a bait and switch point where you go from having the control of your brand, your book, your market, to losing control. And we've seen that happen. There's a self-published author named J.A. Conrath who was making a couple $100,000 a year on his backlist of self-published novels through Amazon. And then they switched their commission rates on authors. They switched to KU, and they started doing exclusives, and he lost half of his income overnight with the changes that they did to publishing. So I do want to be really focused and clear on the fact that if you live inside of Amazon for your financial well-being, you are going to get to a point where they're going to stab you in the back. You're not dealing with a friend. They don't like you. They're not interested in your well-being. They're interested in their brand. But it still is a better alternative, unfortunately, to what the rest of the industry is offering, because I hate to tell you, but FSG and HarperCollins are not your friend either. They never were. They never wanted you to do well. They wanted themselves to do well, and you happen to be an avenue to that end. So it's just difficult to be an author. And the closest you can get to having your own world is by self-publishing through Amazon, because you can still make up to 70% royalties self-publishing on Amazon. If you go through a traditional publisher, you have an agent, and then you have the entire house that's produced your book and distribution. So they're going to give you a maximum of about 15%. You just think about scale, it's really difficult to make a living on 15% of your hard fought book. So I like Amazon for that reason. And I think that the ability to have so much choice is a beautiful thing. I read a book, The UIC by Danny Freeman recently. I had him as a guest on my podcast. It's a great book. If it had gone through a traditional house, it probably could have been a little bit better because he would have had more editors with more eyes on it. But it's a great book. And I think that's the bottom line, is he got the editing he needed to make it a good book. And I got to read it really quickly, just about a year after he finished it, maybe even less, as well as he's making all the royalties on the book he sells. So he can actually think about, like, maybe I have a backlist of 4 or 5 books and I could leave my job and make a run at this. That's the power of Amazon. I think right now I want to be even more cogent than I am. But that's why I do like Amazon, is it gives us the ability to make a living doing what we're doing a lot faster than any other model.
Well, that thing you were saying about, I agree with all this. That thing you were saying about them changing their how they pay people out.
Yeah.
They did that with me on the film side, where I actually turned a profit off a short film. Like, short films you don't make money off of, but through Amazon streaming, I was able to turn a profit off a short film. And like a month after I received the profit, they changed how they pay people out and the numbers and all that stuff. And I never made a profit off my movies after that. And it's very, very sad. And really the only reason they did it is because they want to be able to license more mainstream content. Mm-hmm. And the way they rationalized that was basically screwing over indies.
Yeah. So I found out about this, and this gave me some sort of like conflict. I'm not a huge James Patterson fan. I tried to take opportunities to diss on him in the past. And then I found out during the pandemic that he gave away 7 figures of his own money to fund local bookstores across the country. He created basically why can't I think of the stupid word? Grant. He created a grant that they could apply for, and he kept local bookstores open by doing that. So sometimes the big baddies do good things, but he still is a huge problem with the industry.
Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like the people who read him or John Grisham or one of those guys, like, they're not my audience anyway. So
yeah. I think you are right. I do think you're right. And this is a great question. My wife is unashamedly a fan of romance books, and she will read outside the genre. She loves Love in the Time of Cholera was one of her favorite books. She blazed through it when she got hooked. Sorry about the dog, by the way. And yet I have to recommend a book to her. And the other day I recommended Wanderers by Chuck Wendig, and she started reading it. And she even told me, she's like, great recommendation. I love it. And it's like 3 weeks later and she's not finished. And I was like, what's going on? She's like, well, it's too long. I'm starting, like, I just needed to get through a book a little faster. And I was like, oh, okay. So you can, I think my point here is you can create a monster if you're not careful. If you only eat sugar, eventually sugar's all you want.
you talk about, you tweeted today about Author Advantage Live. What is that?
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for giving me the opportunity. So Chandler Bolt founded Self-Publishing School, which is another podcast in this realm. He's inspired me a lot. And the whole idea is that you can make a living off of your self-published book. And so they've been doing this for several seasons now. And Author Advantage Live is an offshoot of Self-Publishing School, which is a 3-day writing class retreat. They will this year walk you through how to write the book in a timely fashion so that you're not like stuck in the writing thing forever. Then how to market the book, and then how to sell the book, which if you don't know the difference between marketing and advertising, that alone is worth the time because they're going to get really granular with how you separate those things out. And it does cost $97 right now if you were to buy it today, but it is a really cool program that I think anybody can benefit from. And it goes back to earlier in our conversation. If you're not willing to spend money on your business, as an entrepreneur, you have to have the mindset that you're willing to spend money. So it's where you're going to strategically spend your money. And I put my personal stamp on it to say it's worth spending money on. I'm not getting any kind of kickback from them. I will be attending the conference for free. So I guess if that's considered a kickback, then I am. But that's what I get out of it. And it's just a cool opportunity to share it with the community because I really believe in what they're doing.
Great. Well, thanks for coming onto the show. Where can people find you? Where do you want them to go?
I want them to go to Twitter because that's where I've kind of done all in so far. At Jody J Sperling is my handle. And honestly, you can find me anywhere. If you do Jody J Sperling, I show up all over the place. So that's nice.
All right. See you later, man.
All right, man. See you.